Yo, what's up guys? It's been a minute since I last uploaded a video, but the reason why is because I'm so passionate about the topic today. I've been playing Pokemon since I was 7 years old, and Pokemon has been in my heart since then. My love for the franchise literally can't get any bigger, but it is hard to watch the company make wrong decisions time and time again and get away with it scot-free because they know that no matter how much they fuck up, they can at least make a profit off of the mistake. The Scarlet and Violet DLC just dropped last month, and as of recording this, the epilogue for the game came out this morning. So as far as we know, any content drops for the games are pretty much complete. Also, by the way, shameless plug, but I did stream the DLC on my YouTube channel. So if you guys want to go ahead and watch it, click the live section on my channel, and you can, we got a couple live streams that y'all can watch. Nice little background noise if you want to go ahead and check that out. But without further ado, let's talk about how Pokemon needs to change its formula. In order for us to talk about what needs to get fixed, we need to talk about the release timeline of Pokemon games. Years before the Switch release, we had a pretty set in stone formula. Starting with Pokemon Red and Blue for the Game Boy in 1996, we had a 3-year span of time before Gold and Silver released in 1999. In between those releases though, we had a reiteration of Red and Blue in 1998 called Pokemon Yellow that retook us through the Kanto region again. Now following the Gold and Silver games, Pokemon Crystal released a mere year later due to the critical acclaim of the original Gold and Silver titles. 2 years after Crystal's release, we then are introduced to Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire in 2002. This does still follow the formula for releases of new generations of Pokemon happening every 3 years, but then something unexpected happened. In 2004, we got remakes for the original Red and Blue games dubbed Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. These are the first of many remakes that retold the stories of the originals with newer Pokemon and the current generation's graphics. In the same year, the penultimate Hoenn region game was released, being Pokemon Emerald. In 2006, 4 years since Ruby and Sapphire's release, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl had released. This has been the longest gap for Pokemon games releasing, and the jump in quality and change in mechanics definitely shows that their time was well spent. 2 years later, we got the penultimate versions of Diamond and Pearl with Pokemon Platinum, which were released in 2008. A year later, in 2009, we got our first remakes of the Johto region, being Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. These games definitely pushed the boundaries of what made a Pokemon remake. Another 4-year gap from the mainline games, we get Pokemon Black and White in 2010. Another showing of how a 4-year gap has helped them develop their games. 2 years later, instead of getting an enhanced version of the games, we are introduced to our first and only set of sequels to Black and White, being Black 2 and White 2, which are personally my favorite Pokemon games in the series. With them being a sequel game with a time skip, they got the chance to continue character stories while still upgrading the base game mechanics of the predecessors, while also adding in brand new things to make the region even more enjoyable. A year later, we got our 6th generation and our first generation with 3D models. In 2013, we got the release of Pokemon X and Y. The gap in between these new generations were 3 years apart, and a year later, in 2014, we got our 3rd set of remakes being Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. 2016 being the 20th anniversary for Pokemon was the release of Pokemon Sun and Moon, which got followed up only a year after being Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Once again, another 3-year gap in between X and Y and Sun and Moon. Now, the year after is the biggest surprise personally. 2018 was the release of the first ever 3rd version remake. A remake of Pokemon Yellow being Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Pokemon Let's Go Eevee. The community fought for a while if these games were mainline or not, but due to the way that the game was advertised, it was definitely a mainline game. It introduced new Pokemon, it has connection to Pokemon Home, and it had basically everything a Pokemon game usually has besides the catching mechanics and the 2-player co-op mode. A year later in 2019, we got our first console mainline game being Pokemon Sword and Shield. No shocker, but once again another 3-year gap from Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield. Now in 2020, Pokemon announced that 3rd versions of games were now in the past. No longer are we shackled to getting a 3rd version of the same game we've played already. Pokemon announced we would now be getting DLC to act as the 3rd versions in order to tell new stories, take us to new regions, and introduce us to new Pokemon. That year, we got the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra DLC. While they weren't amazing additions at first, they still added a ton of life to the games competitively and casually. In 2021, Pokemon surprised us once again with not just one remake, but an announcement of a demake. We got Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl in 2021, along with an announcement of a game called Pokemon Legends Arceus that would release in 2022. This game changed, the game when it came to making the type of game Pokemon could be. no online battles, and no multiplayer besides trading. Even though it had no multiplayer compatibility, it was still received as one of the best Pokemon games to release in recent memory. Then, in the same year, they released Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. I'm gonna be honest, that shit hurt me a lot. I felt like the possibilities for DLC for Legends Arceus had so much potential, and they just threw it aside like it was nothing to them. But I guess they needed to get another 3-year gap quota filled though, since it has been 3 years since Sword and Shield dropped. And that's the problem. Recently, the formula has been that every 3 years, Game Freak has felt the need to release a new generation for Pokemon to meet their quota. But the question is why? Besides the usual release timeline of mainline games, there's a release timeline of every other media that the Pokemon Company has ownership of. For example, right after a new game releases, we start getting VGC tournaments for the eventual worlds that will happen that year. For those that don't know, VGC is like Video Game Championships, that's the acronym for it. We then get cards and merch with those new Pokemon, and then we get new anime episodes in the said region. Once they hit their 1 year since release mark, they add Pokemon Home compatibility and DLC to increase the game's lifespan and increase the amount of merch and Pokemon cards that they can sell. They then throw in a game that could hold us off for a year, being either a Let's Go game or a remake/demake game in order to meet their 3-year release gap for the mainline game. This cycle is more than likely going to mean that we're either going to get a remake this year or a Let's Go game before they release Generation 10. But there is one thing to note. For a while, Pokemon remakes only come out on the even number generations, except for Gen 3. Fire Red did release during Generation 3, but Heart Gold came out in Generation 4, Oraz came out in Generation 6, BDSP was Generation 8. If they choose to continue this pattern, then we realistically won't see the remake for Black and White until Generation 10. But there are rumors that we might get Generation 5 remakes this year, but personally, I wouldn't hold my breath. Let's get back to topic. I could go on about rumors and all that shit all day, but right now we have to see why they think that they need a mainline game every 3 years. The two outliers in the release schedule are Generation 4 and Generation 5. Both generations got 4 years of dev time, and the extra year that they got shows when you play those games. Mainline games are the catalyst for other mediums to get released. Without new Pokemon and characters, they can't make new cards and new merch. Or at least that's what they think. They can easily release cards of Pokemon that don't get as much shine and attention, as well with merch. This is a multi-billion-dollar company we're talking about. They can afford to give their games an extra year so that they can be seen in a better light. Now, obviously, I know that the Switch runs like a fucking toaster, but there are plenty of games that run well and are pretty decently sized open worlds that also look good. Pokemon just needs a definitive art style that looks nice and clean that can make the games look better than what they actually are. So now that we know what the problems that are holding Game Freak back are, what could an extra year of development time get us? Besides graphics and mechanical overhauls, we could probably see actual voice acting being integrated into the games. For the past 6 years, we've had 3D games that just don't have any type of voice acting at all. I feel like by now we should definitely have some voice acting. Pokemon Masters has so much voice acting, and it irks me that we never get to see these sides of those characters that we see in their respective games. But that's besides the point. We can also potentially have more game modes that they just toss aside in favor of sandwich making. But seriously, I just want the Battle Royale from Sun and Moon back, but reimagined. It was kind of stupid that it was whoever lost all their Pokemon first is the loser, and then the game just ends there, when they could have just had what people usually actually did in their Battle Royales. I remember hella YouTubers were making Battle Royale, I guess PokeTubers specifically, made a lot of Battle Royale coverage and shit that we just never got to see realized and continued. We could have had that shit though. We all know the real reason why that shit stopped though. The thing is, I know Pokemon fans always need something new to play or else they're gonna feel like they're gonna explode. They have no patience at all whatsoever. So the next question is, what could fill in the gaps for mainline games releasing that will give them more time to develop better games? And honestly, they already figured out what to do by outsourcing other companies to remake Pokemon games for them. ILCA was the first company to do it for BDSP, and it wouldn't be surprising if they got asked to remake Black and White, even if the fans don't really appreciate the one-to-one remakes. They could definitely hand off their IP to more companies though, in order to make more side games. Last year, we only really had Detective Pikachu Returns, and that game,
I want a divorce.
That game sure was something. But newer games could come out with new takes on the Pokemon IP from other companies like Square Enix, Monolith Soft, or even indie developers. Nintendo has said recently that they want to let more third-party companies make games using their IPs, so this definitely could be a possibility. Of course, VGC is a big obstacle because they usually always play competitive Pokemon on whatever game releases. Imagine they made a separate game exclusively for battling Pokemon. It'd be like Pokemon Battle Revolution, but a live service game that is constantly being updated throughout the years, adding more and more Pokemon as the games come out. They could still have battles in the main games, but have the big tournaments like at Worlds be put on Battle Revolution, or a game like Battle Revolution. Not only would they be able to have every Pokemon available under one game, but we would also have mechanics that aren't even allowed anymore, like Mega Evolutions and Z moves. There are a few Pokemon that come to mind that you probably can't even bring into newer games because they don't have the forms. You can't bring in Gigantamax Eternatus, you can't bring in whatever the Terrapagos form is called, terrestrialized Terrapagos, and you can't even bring in fucking Ultralight Necrozma from Sun and Moon. Those Pokemon are literally inaccessible, and I feel like the only way to make them accessible is to just have a Battle Revolution type game that brings everything under one net. And the people that complain about the battle animations not looking that good would be able to have a game that makes those battle animations look good as shit, because it's gonna be a battle-focused game. If they really wanted to, they could make it free to play with customization microtransactions, or make it a full-price game. I'd be fine with either. All I know is that Pokemon Showdown, a fan-made game, is kicking their asses right now, and they need to lock the fuck in if they want to capitalize on the easy money that they're missing out on. We already know that Pokemon doesn't like making money, even though they make a lot of money. But they don't like making money. There's so many things that we could have been had that people would be fucking like throwing money at them for, but they just don't want to lock in, dude. Like, they really just don't want to lock in. At the end of the day, I fucking love Pokemon, and I just want what's best for the franchise. I doubt anyone from here would even watch this video, but if they do, I hope y'all take this as constructive criticism to make your games better. With that being said, Pokemon Day 2024 is coming very soon, and I am personally hyped for whatever they might announce that day. There's also plenty of rumors of a Switch 2 and a Nintendo Direct coming soon. No matter what gets announced, I promise I'll be there to either stream it or to at least talk about my feelings about what got announced. Now that's all for today. Thank you guys for watching. If you made it to the end, I cannot promise any more steak dinners. I am financially unstable, and after that last video, steak is not cheap, okay? All right, steak is not cheap. Anyways, I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace out.